unfortunate change, but a very welcome change. And we know that from the Prime Minister down to churches and that, we've all been praying for rain, and we do need to praise God for sending the rain, especially out west. And on the news last night, it was good to see farmers frolicking in the rain and kids trying to swim in the puddles and all that. It was good feeling. But having said that, we've prayed for rain for possibly the last, quite a long time, I would say. Have we stopped to thank God for it? How many of you actually spent a moment and stopped to thank God for the rain? Well, maybe we should do it now. Father, we do thank you for listening to our prayers, and we thank you for the rain that you've sent out west. We know it's very much needed, and we just ask that the rain continues so that the farmers can get back on the feet. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, yesterday I said that Graeme couldn't come in yesterday, but he is here today, and this is going to be a bit different because Graeme usually introduces our special guest. So guess what? We haven't got a special guest today. Well, we have. It's you, isn't it, Graeme?
It's me today.
Yeah. So Graeme will be interviewing himself. I think I'll just sit down and just listen. Okay, welcome back, Graeme. I'm sure you had a good, fruitful time overseas.
I did, yes, and I'd love to bring a good report about it.
Yeah.
But back to the rain, you know, I was impressed that the Canberra Declaration and the Australian Christian Lobby have really pushed that if my people are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear their prayer and heal their land, and forgive their sins and heal their land. And that's been such a thrust in the last month. And there was no weather forecast for rain on much at all on the weekend. So I was really amazed and praising God as you are for that amazing torrent of rain that came all the way down the eastern seaboard.
Yes, and just so you mentioned that, I was listening to a news telecast yesterday, and I think the presenter is an atheist, and he said what you basically said, but he added something to it. He said, yes, there was no prediction for rain this weekend, and it suddenly happened. And he said, well, we all know that Scott Morrison has been praying for rain, so he said, I wonder if there's something in that. So that, well, at least they acknowledge it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we should keep praying and repenting of our sin and turning to God.
God, yeah.
He is the one that withholds the rain or sends it.
Or sends it, yeah.
He's a merciful God. Well, I've just been to Egypt and Syria, and I came back the week before last, and I was there in Egypt for 1 week for the celebration of 10 years of the Kingdom Sat, which Leading the Way with Dr. Michael Youssef set up 10 years ago. I remember back in 2001, it was in October, right after 9/11, that we were in Cairo for a very big and very successful outreach. And we looked out over the housetops, and there was a sea of dishes, TV dishes. And Michael said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could preach through those dishes on television? Well, it was just a comment. And then in 2004, he started to get a bit more serious about it. And then he was literally given a television network, one of the biggest ones in America, just brought it to him by a fellow called Ben Hayden, who had his television show going into every city in America. And he said, the Lord's told me to give this to you. And Michael said, well, I've got a face for radio. And
yes, I think that could be said for a lot of us. It could be.
And he said, what's more, I've got a redhead at home, and she said, if you're ever a tele-evangelist, it'll be over my dead body. And Ben Hayden said, well, that's your problem, because the Lord's told me that I'm going to give you this network. And that's where it took off. And in 2010, we started Kingdom Sat, and were invited to use the Nile Sat platform, which was when Joshua Youssef, Michael's son, was given the information, given the offer. He really thought that the agent was kidding, because Nilesat was an Egyptian government platform, had no Christian content at all, not even the Orthodox or any of the Coptic Church were on it, and so he thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. So we went on Nilesat, which gave us the opportunity to broadcast all through that area, right up into North Africa and across to Saudi Arabia. And then it followed that we were given an offer to take KingdomSat and put it on ArabSat. And again, Joshua thought, the agent's pulling my leg, this can't be possible. But they said, no, we like Dr. Youssef's preaching. He just sticks to the gospel. He doesn't rubbish anything else. He's just straight down the line with the gospel. So we went onto ArabSat, and we've had millions of responses. Well, we were already getting millions of responses on radio through the dual language broadcasts. So that was the big celebration for 10 years in Cairo, and it went off very, very well. It was wonderful. It's on ltw.org. You can go and watch it. It's really a production. We had the beautiful choir and the number one maestro conductor from Egypt leading the choir and the band. It was really something. It was a real spectacular. And in the same church, which is the Castro El Debra church, it's the KDEC, the Castro El Debra Evangelical Church, which is right in Cairo, right in Tahrir Square. And Dr. Youssef's been told that maybe I shouldn't say this on here, I don't know, but anyhow I'll say it, that the building that was built to hide the church, because otherwise it would have been in the centre of Tahrir Square, which is where the Cairo Museum is, and you've all heard about the Arab Spring and Tahrir Square, that was built there, is now under El-Sisi going to be demolished, so the church will once again be in the middle of Tahrir Square. It's a great church, and they've got such a great work there. And we were there for that night, and we heard such wonderful things. We heard from the church there that there's so many people coming to the Lord that they just don't have the resources to disciple them, which is, of course, where KingdomSat does its job. It's got over 45 different preachers, like-minded preachers who proclaim the gospel, most of them Arabic, and it's got dual language. We do dual language in 26 different of the biggest languages in the world. So we had a wonderful time hearing about the amazing things that are happening, just amazing things that are happening in the Middle East. In fact, it was so impressive that when I got back to Sydney, I said to my son, who's a strong Christian, I said, it looks like the Middle East is going to become Christian. He said, that's profound. He said, I've just put down a book by Jonathan Kahn that says the same thing.
That's amazing.
And he's a prophet. So I started reading his book. So back in 2000, in the early part of this century, Joshua Youssef was in the KDEC church, where they have a baptismal set up down the back of the church, and he was watching these Muslim background believers being baptized, and the pastor in the church said to him at the time, some of the people that are being baptized now will lose their lives for this. And I now see how true that is, having spent a week in Jordan and speaking to some of them. They really have to, once they've been baptized, that's the real clincher. That's when they've really got to watch out and decide whether they're going to go or stay, pretty much.
But also, Graeme will be interviewing Graeme.
Well, reporting on my recent trip to the Middle East, to Egypt and Jordan, with leading the way with Dr. Michael Youssef and Help the Persecuted. When Joshua Youssef heard that a lot of those Muslim background believers would lose their lives simply because they were being baptized, we were using an independent mission group from the States who had a policy of any new converts should be sent back home. Now this meant a certain death to a large number of them, because honour killings are okay, and most, even in Jordan. And so we thought that was a bit harsh. So we started we put our own teams on the ground and started Help the Persecuted, which sprang out of the discipleship of these new Muslim background believers. And then they needed things like accommodation because they'd been kicked out of home, they'd lost their jobs, they may have had to flee from Syria or Iraq, which is where we were, even Lebanon, where we were mostly working at the time, and still are. And that grew to the point where since then, it started about 2009, helped the persecutors started with Leading the Way about 2009. We've helped 30,000 Muslim background believers to resettle, given them accommodation, helped them with visas, helped them with immigration. And of course they make the very best immigrants because they are absolutely dyed-in-the-world Christians. This hasn't come cheaply. They are not Christians because, hey, that's the thing to be when you want to emigrate to Australia. These people are fleeing for their lives. So even this year we have spent a total. This financial year we've spent a total of, and I'm talking about just this American financial year. We've spent so far this American financial year we've spent $429,000 US to help 87 cases. And when I was there, I met a number of them. So the Iraqi electrician that I met was one of the recent ones. I went to the flat that we're providing for him. He's a single man of 45, never been married, but he was living in Iraq and working with the American forces on the ground. He was also driving tankers. He got hold of a Bible and read it, decided that Christianity was for him, that it was a better way to go, and attempted to be baptised by the local church. I won't mention the denomination.
Yeah, best not to.
And they messed him around for 8 years. They even sent him into Syria with a note from one leader to another, do not baptise this man. And he found out. They said, hang around for a few days and think about it. Went back to his hotel. He'd been robbed of $9,000 odd that he had in his kick from his room. Had to have assistance to get back. Came back to Iraq. Got a job back on the base for a Muslim company. And the chaplain of the American on that American base agreed to baptise him in the end. As soon as he found out that, as soon as his bosses found out that he'd been baptised, being Muslims, they sacked him. He said, which was a great thing because I was on $200 a month, and within 2 weeks, the Lord gave me a job for $2,000
That's a big increase, big pay rise.
It was a big pay rise, and he was driving tankers full of oil, and they said, you must be armed. He said, no, I've got all the protection I need, thanks. So he did that job for quite some time. He had left his father and family when he became a Christian. They'd thrown him out, and he had been sending them money for decades now, for practically 2 decades. And he was told by a neighbour of his father, you need to come back to your hometown because your father's causing problems. So he went back, and as he walked down the drive, his father stuck his head out the window and shot at him. The bullet missed but ricocheted and hit him in the arm. So he fled, ran back, and then fled into Jordan, where we met with him and are now helping him. Now, there's a man who's an electrician, very clever with computers. He helps our office out with all their computer problems, and just a delightful Christian, full of faith, and what a citizen for any country he would be. So, frankly, I hope he can come to Australia.
Yeah, I was about to say, maybe you could, I don't know what the process is, but maybe we could get him over here.
Well, yeah, and I'm determined to make inquiries along those lines, because we'll call him David. He is just absolutely he's gold as a Christian, and then even in Jordan, it's illegal if you've got a Muslim name on your ID, and you're told you now call yourself by a Christian name, that's enough to have you jailed. It may even be enough to have you executed. I met, we'll call her Lily, and she had been a young girl who went to Morocco to study from Jordan. Her brother, who had become a Christian and left the home, gave her a Bible and said, well, read it for yourself, you're an intelligent girl. So she read it and became a Christian. She came back, her mother found the Bible in her room and threw her out of the house. We began helping her when she applied as a client, and we have so many applications. It's overwhelming really for our team of 16 people on the ground in Jordan. And she attempted, because it got really bad with her family after her, they put a sort of a kill order on her, a fatwa, and she attempted to leave the country but was stopped at the border because the mother had reported her to the police, so her name was on a list. So she was detained and taken to prison. Our man on the ground, I call him Peter, he went to the head of the police, whom he knew because he'd used to dealing with him, and was actually said to him at the time, he said, the King of Jordan has just said that we shouldn't be doing this sort of thing. I don't think he'd be very pleased with you for doing this. And the chief of police shook his head and said, look, come with me outside. So they went into the hallway, outside, into the stairwell actually, outside of the range of the cameras. And he said, can you get me a Bible? I've got to read this. I've got to read it myself. Anyhow, Lily got out, and she's now, she flew from Jordan to the UK. She stayed there for a while. Now she's in America, where she's, I think, now married to her American Christian husband. So we're able to help people like that who, if we couldn't, we've absolutely no idea we know what would happen to them if we weren't able to assist them. And of course right now we've got our team in northern Syria, which is in the news a lot. Yeah. And there's a correction that needs to be made in the media about northern Syria. We all see the condemnation of Trump for pulling out of northern Syria.
That's right, yes.
And we read articles about it, and I read a couple this morning. And I was actually talking to Joshua Youssef this morning, who is a close friend of Vice President Pence. And that's occurred because one of the Leading the Way board members, by the name of Nick Ayres, was he was the chief of staff of Mike Pence. And so that's why we've got Mike Pence talking at our inaugural separation from Leading the Way. We help the persecuted actually separate it as a standalone, because then we can get US aid, and we couldn't do that as partners with Leading the Way. So it's now a standalone organisation. Mike Pence spoke very supportively. So as soon as Joshua said, as soon as I heard that President Trump had pulled the American forces from northern Syria, I immediately contacted Nick and said, please ask the Vice President to intercede for the Christian community in the north of Syria. And so Nick said, by all means. He said, I'll come back to you. So he came back and he said, the Vice President has said, get us as many testimonies from churches and people that you know on the ground there in northern Syria as to what's going on. So immediately Joshua got in touch with our man on the ground in northern Syria, and was quite surprised about his reply. His reply came back, no, we don't want the Kurds ruling us, we want Assad ruling us because he'll give us more protection. Now, do we hear that in the media?
No, we don't.
No, we don't. So it's such a complicated story, and everybody wants a piece of the action, and everybody wants to make a bit of political capital out of it. But the reality is, I can say this from first hand, our man on the ground, who's rescuing Christians and helping them to flee from persecution in northern Syria, he'd rather have the Assad regime than have the Kurds.
And for our listeners, Assad is the president or premier of Syria.
He's the president of Syria. Or the king, isn't he? I think he may even be a king. But anyhow.
Anyway, he's the leader.
Yeah, he's the leader.
Just tuned in, we're having a chat with Graeme. He's telling us about his adventures, I'll term that loosely, about his overseas trip with Michael Youssef. And we've had some interesting stories so far. So what other amazing facts or amazing stories have you got for us?
I was so impressed with the new Christians there. A young man of 23 whose father was a very renowned imam who travelled the world teaching on Islam, was on the verge of finding out, because his sister had found out, that he had become a Christian. This young man was so astute. At age 9 he could quote the Quran, and he had simply looked into the Quran and compared it with Christianity and become a Christian recently. Spoke perfect English. His family had been broken up, but he was fortunate enough to have a multi-visa for Canada, multi-entry visa for Canada, and all he needed was the airfare, about $800. It was such a pleasure to be able to help him and see him flee, because he was sweating on any time now. He said, once Dad knows, once my father knows, then I'll have an army after me. Yep. So it was so good to see him out of the country and safely ensconced in Canada. And we were given a meal. We were cooked a meal with our at the home of our chiefs on the ground in Jordan, in Amman, by an ex-dealer of alcohol, who was a brave man. We'll call him Dan. He was in Karakosh, and he shouldn't have been dealing alcohol anyhow.
Because it's banned, isn't it?
That's right.
In a lot of yes.
But he just knew who to pay off, and he was in with everybody that he could just pay them off, and he had a very flourishing business. And he became a Christian. He got a Bible, read it, was convicted, and became a Christian. So when ISIS arrived, they smashed up his home and smashed all his alcohol, and he managed to flee. It was such a tale. I haven't got time to tell the tale, but such a tale of only just making it with his family, and his father-in-law who threatened to stop him and dob him in, and anyhow he made it by the skin of his teeth into Jordan, and we began to help him and his family. And he still owned the house in Karakosh. Of course, he was out of the alcohol business and into the gospel business. What a wonderful man, and full of faith and so beaming for God. He decided that while he was being helped by us in Karakosh, that he would give the house to help the persecuted, to have it as a child care centre, as a church, and as a centre for us in Iraq. He was approached by the local Muslims in Karakosh, and they said, we'll give you $50,000 for the house. He said, no, I've given it to the church. They said, we'll give you $200,000 for the house. He said, no, I've given it to the church. They said, name your price, we'll give it to you. Now, of course, that was a temptation, because here he is in Jordan, broke, really, and relying on assistance from Help the Persecuted to keep his family, and he, in fact, the latest it was that he was only just able to get a license to drive hire cars. He can't actually drive. It's funny law, but he can rent-a-cars, so he can rent a car and work, and sell and use his truck to make an income. Use a truck that he rents to make an income. So he said, no thanks, I've given it to the church. I mean, of course it was a temptation to take whatever price he named, but he wouldn't. So that was just a typical typical case, and I heard so many of them. The final day that I was there, we went to the Druze suburb, and our people on the ground spent the morning actually telling us. We went there over 2 days, but the first morning they spent the morning telling us about how they process this huge number of applications that come through, and they've got a very stringent process.
Before, could you explain what Druze are, please?
Okay, Druze are a sect of Islam which is a mixture, a bit like, and look, I'm no expert, but it sounds a bit like Baha'i, but they've got a mixture of belief that includes Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. They can't practice their religion legally in Jordan, so when they become Christians, they're between a rock and a hard place, because they've got to deal with the Druze community. If you're in the Druze community, you can't marry outside the Druze community. You must marry somebody from the Druze community, and of course they don't practice their religion, so they have to practice Islam. So they've got to deal with people that they practice Islam with as well, both of which will be highly offended if they convert. In fact, when we went into that suburb, our man on the ground, we're calling him David, aren't we? No, we're not. We're calling him Peter. Our man on the ground was quite nervous. He said, we haven't actually come in here before. They've always come to us for interviews. We've never actually come to their homes. So he was checking the roofs and the windows.
for snipers or anything.
So he was a bit nervous. And so we met some wonderful families. One of the ones that made a huge impression was this lovely middle-aged lady, 40-something, 30 to 40-something, with her lovely husband and her 4 children. And she was giving her testimony. Of course, it was being interpreted by Peter. She had got a hold of a Bible and had read the Bible and was very impressed, and saw a verse one day that was so impacted her. It was from Psalms, I can't quote it. And she said to the Lord, she prayed, if this is true, I would become a Christian. She had a 3-year-old toddler who was close by, and the toddler walked over to her and, instead of talking baby talk, in perfect Arabic, quoted that scripture, and then went back to her baby talk.
That's amazing, isn't it?
So she got in touch with us, and we sent 2 evangelists that we've got working in the area, and she heard them coming and looked out the window and saw them coming down the drive. She didn't see 2 people. She saw 2 intensely bright lights coming down the drive.
That sounds like she saw 2 angels, doesn't it?
I think so. So that confirmed for her these people are worth listening to. And now she's the mother and the wife of this beautiful family. That we had lunch with them, and just a delight, and just so full on for the gospel. And that was one of the cases. While we were with another family, I'm recording all these interpreted interviews, and I wasn't able to record this one very well, because there was a conversation going on between the Muslim husband Peter, who hadn't become a Christian, and the wife, who was telling us how she became a Christian, and he was considering it. And Peter was talking to him for 10 minutes. And after that conversation, I actually said, I'm going to turn my recorder off because I can't record 2 conversations at once. And Peter turned and said, well, he just committed his life to the Lord. He prayed the Spirit came to the Lord right while we were sitting there. And he was beaming and hugging his little boy, and breeding nightingales out on the balcony. There was another lady who we met with her daughter, and she was on her own as a Druze, and she had come to the Lord and had found that she could travel into Syria and buy clothes in Syria cheaper than they could be manufactured in Jordan, and bring them across the border. And she had this suitcase full of clothes that she had people coming around to buy from her while she preached the gospel to them.
Oh, well.
So we'd helped her initially, but she was now self-sufficient. So that was another wonderful testimony. But boy, it was a long haul to go down the steps to her place and then come back up again.
Okay, we'll take a break now, and we'll come back in a few minutes and we'll do a